Hello, my name's Christian Henson from Spitfire Audio. I also have a day job, which is a composer of film, TV and games music. And this very laborious tutorial today is going to be the magic and very dull art of tracklaying, or otherwise known as technical preparation for tracking and mixing films, TV and games. This process that I've developed has been a product of nearly 20 years of blood, sweat and tears. I guess it started for me in 1997, and Pro Tools was still a kind of fledgling technology from the point of view of using it for TV and film. So I've learnt the hard way and the wrong way. And another facet of our industry is that budgets have shrunk over the years. And fortunately, technology enables us to do some pretty amazing stuff, but you have to use it in the right way. And the big key difference between what we do as media composers and the album boys and the dance guys is we have to handle a huge amount of files, arrangements, cues, whatever you want to call them, in one go. So 5 minutes saved here and there has a radical effect on our end result. So, for example, this low-budget British movie I'm working on, fantastic film called Tommy's Honour, it has over 40 cues. If I work out a way of saving my mixing or tracking engineers 5 minutes per cue, whether it be preparation or on the sessions, we're looking at 3.3 hours. That's just 5 minutes time saved on each cue times 40, 3.3 hours. That's a third of a working day. I don't know about you guys, but I very rarely have longer than 3 days to mix an entire show like this with, say, 40 odd cues. So these things are absolutely crucial. The other thing that tracklaying does is ensure that the orchestration, copying, the recording, the synchronization and the mixing all comes together in a synchronized manner. So we take a lot of precautions at the outset, and we also make sure that we check everything through thoroughly, which I'll talk about later. One of the things that I've learned to adopt is an ergonomic approach. It's a repetitive process, so if you can use muscle memory to help you at all, that's a useful thing. So the first thing I do is to actually prepare my Finder in a way that works according to my workflow. So on the left-hand side, I basically have my Logic pane with an orchestration folder, a tracklaying folder, which is where the audio goes, and my actual Logic cues. I then have a middle pane, which is my orchestrator's Dropbox, dump stuff in there, and then he fires stuff off to copyists or might send me back some rebar suggestions. You need a 2/4 bar here and there, anything I've missed. And finally, my Pro Tools folder, which is where all of the audio ends up. Just a brief outline of my system. I used to have loads of PCs and Macs. I now just have one dustbin, and I run everything internally, courtesy of a Blackmagic SSD bay. On this project, I've really tried to keep my template to a minimum, so I rely on my compositional resources and not my production and sonic ones. This also makes it convenient for us to do this tutorial today, so it doesn't take ages for us to rebus and all of that kind of stuff. I'm also using Pro Tools, basically just my tape machine that I lay my 5.1 or pretty much 5.0 in this case demos into. It runs my picture, my dialogue, and I'll also load in my multi-tracks to prepare for the tracking and mixing sessions. I get Logic to talk to Pro Tools via an IAC driver. Very simple stuff. There's Logic. If that's going, so it's Pro Tools. Pretty cool stuff. These dustbins are amazing. What you can do with them, absolutely fantastic. Basically, what we do with tracklaying is we're preparing several different things. We're preparing stuff for our orchestrator, we're preparing our multi-tracks, and we're preparing our mixes, of course. Again, this is not a very producery kind of show, so I'm not going to have to mute off lots of different effects and stuff. The one thing I would never include is reverb, but that is actually an external TC6000 that comes in here. Because we'll be preparing this by bouncing offline, it simply won't be getting to the TC, so I don't even need to mute anything, which is quite a convenient way of working. Where plugins are concerned, I don't really understand, and I've tried always, I don't really understand why you would want to break your mix before giving it to your mix engineer to try and reassemble again. So if you'll notice there's some pianos here that have a little bit of corrective EQs. Leave them in. It's not a problem. Your mix engineer is there to improve what you've already done, not to try and reassemble what you've already done. Musical delays, and as you can see here, some pans. I just leave them like that. I've made some choices. The directors, the producers, they've got used to it. So let's stick with that and allow the mix engineer to be creative and to make things a lot better. Okay, so a couple of starting points for preparation to Tracklay. You'll notice that my first tempo event is on bar 3. We don't want that. We want it on bar 1. So just go to bar 1 and create an event. I can show you later why that would affect the MIDI file that we're going to export. But basically, ostensibly, what you're going to do, if you have no tempo event, it'll default to 120 at between bars 1 and 3, which can, further down the line, cause a whole world of pain. The other thing to do is to check that, certainly in Logic, that the click is off. A new feature of Logic is that it bounces offline with the click if it's on. Something that I'll show is mildly useful later, but it's something I wish wasn't a new feature of Logic, because there's nothing like tracklaying an entire cue only to find that everything has a click on. But that's when we all get a bit more jaded and a bit more tired further down the line. The other thing you'll notice is that I have a multi-list here. So these are all the tracks, the pre-laid tracks that I have in the show. I always stick the printed click way up at 200, so there's a bit of space in between just in case I miss anything. And you'll notice a curious time code. So I'm going to take this time code, copy it over there, and more of that later. Other things to consider is make sure it's in solo, so whatever you're lassoing is the actual thing that's been recorded, not the entire mix. And really importantly, make sure that you have your locators activated. If you don't and you lasso that, then it's just going to tracklay that little bit. Now that's quite a good system if you're really desperately stingy and want to save on hard disk space. But I just make sure that every single file is the exact same length, even if it only contains a tiny portion. This is just one of our double, triple, quadruple checks for the engineers to know, hang on a minute, there's one file here that's not the same length as all the others. I think there might be something wrong here. We need to double check that. Hopefully not call me up, because that's frustrating, but just to kind of give it a listen and maybe fire me an email. So here we go. You'll see how it's incredibly boring, incredibly repetitive, but you build up your muscle memory, you get a lot faster. And just a little sideline, if you ever want to assist a composer, a little tip, don't ever mess with their screens. The number of assistants I've had who will jump on my rig, close these screens down, maybe change my mouse speed, maybe put my dock up to the left-hand side. I can't tell you, when you're working at speed and you're relying on muscle memory for things to literally move stuff around, it would be like moving furniture around in a blind man's house. Please, please don't do it. So anyway, here we go. So I'm going to lasso these two longs articulations, and we're going to get to bounce them. I don't want it to be a surround bounce. You can see I'm moving from left to right here, strings long, and then I'm creating in the TL file a dedicated folder. TOH 5M32. So TOH is the show ID, which I do. It's kind of like airports, which is kind of, I think it's fun. And then I stick a TL just so I've not got hundreds of different folders called the same thing. And then we're going to paste in this. Now, what's really, really crucial about this list here is that we have unique identifiers. Again, this is something that will enable your mix and track engineers to record this stuff in a day, mix it in 3 days. It is absolutely fundamental that each track has an identical track identifier so that they can match tracks further down the line, pull in the plugins they've already worked out work really well for your different sounds, and match it up. This is the only way that you're going to be able to get through 40 cues in 3 days. So strings longs, but what I will add is a unique file identifier, M32 at the end, so I don't have dozens of 100 strings longs data files on my computer. So let's bounce that. Whilst I'm doing that, it's worth pointing out that the way in which I stem my fake strings or sampled strings is again based on years of blood, sweat and tears. but mainly because often many of these aspects, pizzicatos, col legnos, are things that I won't actually get a live band to record. When you're working on budgets, like I do, the personnel, it's so important that you don't divvy stuff up. So you need to get the players doing the important stuff. Here's a prime example. I often will use tremolando and harmonics to colour just a little sheen on the top of arrangements. The last thing I want is to use precious resources to... Sorry, not very good at multitasking. Precious resources to, string players divvy up so you can play a kind of a harmonic octave on the top. I'm happy for samples to do that boring work. The other reason I split all of these things up is because of the quirks of sampling, and it's just simply a fact of life that you can never get a string player playing a long articulation to stop dead. So he will always, or she will always, diminuendo the end, thus rendering the room less reactive. So shorts, pizzes, collets always sound wetter than longs. It's pretty much nothing you can do that. We've tried for many years. These Arctic strings aren't actually the commercially known library. They're actually my own personal library that I then had to call Frozen Strings when we released them for free, because these other dudes had done... Oh no, sorry, I'm confusing myself here. These other dudes had done the Arctic Strings library. So they're actually available in labs. The euphonium choir, that's the name for the euphonium and horn choir in Albion 2, which is my favourite legato patch that we've ever made. It's absolutely brilliant. Some percussion here. And yes, I am going to make you watch a whole lot of this, because you'll see how it's really easy to start after a while getting complacent and making mistakes, and these can be very costly in the long run. Okay, that one, it's actually, I've executively renamed that Baron, because I want the clients to believe that it's a totally Celtic affair that we're doing here. Tommy's Chugs are a brilliant guitar quartet. Tommy's Chugs. The good thing about this way of track laying as well is if you do have any sound that's assigned to your surrounds, if you work in 5.1 at this stage, and it will just automatically bus out of that because you're going down to the bottom of the track that's selected and you're bouncing from whichever output that's coming out of. Okay, so where we were, lovely sine wave, EXS24, I love it. I often pretend to directors that it's some Flash SE1X Pro, but it isn't. It's the EXS24 default position. I've also got these cheeky shorts which are mimicking the piano. One of the reasons why, this is a good example of something I could really shorten there, but the problem with that is that it's going to be a different length. And now I've forgotten. Anyway, from here on it might be a bit longer, but you'll see what I mean. When it all comes in, you'll see that there might be an inconsistency. So let's bounce and go down to string shorts. Which again, things like shorts and pits need barely any reverb at all adding to them, whereas longs really do need a bit of help. A lot of notes there, so she's going to take a little longer. Here we go. It's amazing how quickly these things run these days. And then my lovely upright piano, felted. Piano 1, nearly there, guys. And piano 2. These are kind of quite cool. They're basically different systems. Pro Tools is being eager. Here we go. kind of like a bell choir, and then I've got this kind of interesting sustained thing at the end, which is, I think, quite cool. Anyway, where were we? And 2 surround off. Please don't thumbs down me on YouTube. This is a true life representation of how dull media composition can be. And if you're rich enough, you can get assistance to do this, but this is your last line of defense with your orchestrator. I kind of bundle the process, so it's all done at one time. And I always absolutely insist on being the person who sends the stuff to the orchestrator. You can fix track lays, you can fix stuff in the mix, but if you're sitting in front of 60 musicians and like me, you don't read music, there's kind of very little you can do. So it's best to avoid that. Okay, finally, what we need to do is switch on the dreaded click. Just find a channel that we can bounce from. Surround bounce. Dreaded click, printed. As you can see, she's a bit busier doing that. Fantastic. Now, as we made a change at the very beginning of this process, we added a tempo event at the very top. It's very important that we save at this time so that if there is a recall, and these are always possible, you know, you've printed 2 things together or your engineer wants something separated out, that you're basically going back to where you left it. Very important. The next step is we need to prepare this for the orchestrator. So you want to give him as lean a file as possible. You don't want to include anything that he doesn't have to orchestrate. So first thing I do, strip out all the audio so it doesn't get loads of prompts. And then I'm going to take away all the percussion. And that's ready for him. So I'm going to do this little save as. And like I did in the TL file, I'm going to go TOH 5M32 orc. Save down without the audio files. And then I'm going to also export MIDI. I'm not entirely convinced he still uses this, but we certainly do, as you'll see in a minute. So that's nearly prepared for the orchestrator. Next thing we need to do is get him a demo so he can listen to what he's working on. And this is where we need to make sure our audio is all printed to bar 1. So you'll notice there's a marker there for 5M34. Let's put on one in for this cue, 5M32. And this is the point at which we have to spot in where bar 1 is. And unfortunately, that it introduces a margin of error, which is pretty confusing when you're there with 80 musicians. So I do this very slowly. 05, 11, 41, 18, that's the same as that. Curiously, if I were to, for example, change that to, say, 11 hours and go to Pro Tools and copy this time code into here, that works. Now, if I take that back to 15 hours, or indeed, just for the sake of argument, 2 hours, copy that, put that into Pro Tools, it doesn't work. So that's why we have to physically paste it in here and copy it by sight to Pro Tools, which is rather annoying. So I'm just going to check that this audio file, the demo, is indeed at bar 1. I mean, it's not super tight bit of drum and bass anyway, so it is. So I'm happy to give our orchestrator a crude stereo based on the left and right of the 5.1 or 5.0s. Make sure it's interleaved. I'm not going to export it as an MP3 because Pro Tools can't export an MP3 that's interleaved. I'm going to make sure that I'm in the right place, and that's 532 orc. Yes, it seems to know mysteriously that that's the right way to go. Export. Okay, let's finish off servicing our orchestrator. My eyes scan down, you can see one that isn't zipped. There we are. So there's all of the muck from Logic, but basically there's the Logic file, there's the WAV, there's the MIDI. Let's zip that. And just a point about the MP3. I mean, this day and age, broadband really isn't a problem, but I used to meticulously prepare everything as an MP3. If it was a really complicated arrangement or a big blockbuster movie, I would probably stem it for the orchestrator so you could hear what each individual aspect of the orchestra was doing, but not necessary for this because it's a very simple score. Just copy that into Dropbox, and that's now on its way to Paris. Fantastic. Okay, so finally, let's prepare Pro Tools for our mix engineer, and it's a very simple process. We find the Tracklay files, and we drag them in, and you'll see, I'm sure you Pro Tools ninjas will go, there's a quicker way of doing that. Because I mucked around playing some stuff, they're not all the equal length, but you can see the value of keeping everything equal. It would demonstrate some issues. So I print a click, very rarely used, but it is a means of checking the Pro Tools click against what is printed. It's just yet another stop and check. And our final part of the process is to import the MIDI. Go there. And all we're doing is importing the tempo and the key signature. In order to do that, we need to import all the rubbish MIDI tracks, which we'll get rid of immediately. Track, delete, delete, remove. Now you'll see I also clicked import it to selection. Now I don't know why, but that actually very rarely puts it at the selection point. You can see it's actually deleted my marker annoyingly. If it doesn't import it to the point that you want, you would then just go time operations, move song start, and it would just say start to your selection wherever you are. Very simple. So I'm just going to put in a 532. Goodness knows where that other one has gone. And there we go. So at this point, I would send it off to an assistant or an assistant engineer or my track or mixing engineer, and he would check against a number of things. He would check the Pro Tools click against the printed click. He would check the music against the scores, and he would check the music against the demos to make sure everything's in place. But you'll see that this complicated, beautiful tempo map is all in, and hopefully everything will be in place. I think it's better to get other people to check it for you, because by this point, as a composer, you have snow blindness, and all sorts of kind of audio hallucinatory things will start happening where you think you've done something, or you think you've listened to something, or you're not listening to these, you're listening to the demo, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's great to get a fresh and younger set of ears on this stuff. I think I've just about covered everything that I use to approach tracklaying, but I just think the kind of, make it as anal as possible, make it as consistent as possible, make sure everything starts from bar one, make sure that all the file lengths are the same, all of that kind of stuff. That'll help you really be able to diagnose any issues as and when they arise, and they will arise, because preparing 40 odd cues, preparing even a larger mix, there's always going to be human error involved. So finally, just save this down as TOH 5M32 Tracklay, and that with its associated set of audio files will wing its way across to the tracking engineer. This time it's going to be Nick Taylor at Air Adele Studios, where we'll be recording a small band who will kind of sit on top of these samples, and hopefully, because of the way I've tracklayed, we'll have a smooth mixing process that will give us results that we really like. Anyway, thank you so much for persevering. It really is quite a laborious and boring tutorial. Don't thumbs down me. That's just life. This is how tracklaying is. I hope it's been good to give you an insight, even if you don't use Logic or Pro Tools, just a set of principles for tracklaying. Thanks again. Bye-bye.